attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is a 9/11 free fall. Good evening, everyone. This is Andy Steele. Thank you once again for tuning in. Tonight, I am honored to have on William Binney. He's a former technical director at the NSA, and he's a whistleblower who was first coming out even before Snowden, talking about all the unconstitutional things that the agency is doing. He's a recent signatory to the petition at AE911truth.org, calling for a new investigation into the destruction of the Twin Towers and Building 7, and he's going to be on this show tonight talking about that, talking about the NSA, and giving advice to the 9/11 Truth movement on how to move forward and the best way to approach this issue when dealing with official channels. He's got a lot of experience with that. So this is a pretty long interview. I'm going to be playing that for you in just a minute or so. Before I do play that interview, I just want to remind everybody that 9/11, the anniversary, is only a few weeks away, and there are some great activities taking place in New York and really all over the country to commemorate the occasion, to provide an opportunity for 9/11 Truth activists to get together and plan and socialize and just kind of build off of each other's energy. If you're close to New York, or you can make it to New York City, the events start on September 11th itself. There's a press conference at 11 a.m. At 2 p.m. there's going to be the New York City premiere of The Anatomy of a Great Deception at Theater 80 in the East Village. Friday at 10 a.m. there's going to be outreach at the 9/11 Memorial Park, which is at the corner of Liberty and Greenwich Street. At 3 p.m. there's going to be outreach actions at the New York Times Rethink 9/11 billboard. And at 7 p.m. It's called 9/11 Truth Cafe. It's going to have live music and socializing at the 6th Street Community Center. This is at 638 East 6th Street between Avenues B and C in the East Village. And then on Saturday at 2 o'clock there's going to be a symposium. It's called The 9/11 Awakening Goes Mainstream. And speakers are going to include 9/11 survivor Ricky D. William Pepper is going to be there. Rudy Dent is going to be there. He's the firefighter who was there on the day of 9/11. They're going to have architects Bill Brinier and Richard Gage, and of course Bob McIlvain, Van Screen, and Catherine Montano. They're 9/11 family members. So be there or be square if you can make it. If you can't make it to New York, there's opportunities in other cities. You can go to see screenings of The Anatomy of a Great Deception. September 5th, it's going to be in Detroit. September 11th, it's going to be in Houston. September 11th, also in Tempe, Arizona, as well as Oakland and West Hartford, Connecticut. And the locations are listed at AE911truth.org. If you go to the main page and just click at the top of the screen, it's all listed there for you, and you can plan your event. And if you need any advice on traveling or finding hotels or anything like that, you can use the usual channels. Priceline.com, traveling in New York, Hopstop.com can tell you how to manipulate the subways. And if you have any questions about anything, you can contact AE911truth.org, or you can email me to asteele@AE911truth.org. Alright, before I play my interview with William Binney, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We'll do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. William Binney was a technical director at the NSA. He was involved in developing solutions to code, cipher, and data systems used during the Cold War. He also designed computer logic to code automation of analysis of these systems. He's a well-known whistleblower. He brought to light the NSA's money-wasting and unconstitutional programs, and he resigned in 2001 after 30 years of service. He was rated by the FBI for his whistleblowing, and we'll talk about that later on in this interview, and he continues to speak out about the NSA even now. And he's one of the latest signatories to the petition at AE911truth.org, calling for a new investigation into the destruction of buildings 1, 2, and 7 at the World Trade Center complex on 9/11. Mr. Binney, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor, and I briefly kind of ran through your great history here of service for the country, both during your career and after it. But tell us more about your educational and career background, anything that I may have left out.
Well, I went to school in University, Pennsylvania State University, Penn State, and I was in a College of Science, majoring in mathematics, and I minored in chemistry for the first 2 years I was there until the lab blew up. When you got into organic chemistry, had these large chemical reactions going on down the entire lab, and one weekend the whole lab blew out. So I thought this is kind of a dangerous occupation. So I switched from that to mathematics, saying, well, what can you do to yourself with a pencil? You know, how much damage can you do? So I got out of chemistry for that reason, and it was just too dangerous, and so I ended up in mathematics, and then I got into the service, the Army, because this was 1965. I was getting out of school, and the Army was coming and drafting all kinds of people at that time to send into Vietnam. That was 1965. That's when they were building up in Vietnam, and most of the people in my area I was from the country, central western Pennsylvania. And so I was a hunter, and that meant I was a pretty good shot with a rifle. And all the people I knew out there in Pennsylvania that were getting drafted at that time were also good shots. And so they were being sent directly into the rifle companies, go up into the front lines in Vietnam to kill people, and I didn't want to do that. So that was one thing I wanted to do, but I didn't particularly care to kill anybody. So I looked at the options that I had, and they basically said you could volunteer, pick your first tour, and they would assign you accordingly. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll try to, and that would get me out of the rifle companies too. So I got into a specialty from that, and that happened to be analysis. And so the Army put me in the Army Security Agency, and that was intelligence, the signals intelligence arm of the CSS for the Army. NSA, you see, is NSA CSS. It's not just NSA, it's the CSS, which is the Combined Security Services. That's the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine components of the military that do SIGINT, and they're attached to NSA and directly under them, under the Department of Defense. And so I was in that, and that's how I got into signals intelligence. And from the Army, after I got out of the Army, I went into NSA, and then I stayed there from 1970, when I joined NSA as a civilian, through October of 2001. And in there, I had been experienced and focused primarily on the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact. So I was looking at a lot of things like the invasion of Czechoslovakia, Afghanistan, the Yom Kippur War, all kinds of events like that, down through the Sino-Soviet border, things like that, down through history. So I had a fairly long track record in analyzing the Soviet military operations.
So you were right a part of the history of the latter part of the 20th century. You were right in there, part of it, making it happen, and the great service that you've done. Now, let's talk about 9/11. Now, you signed the petition recently, and thank you for doing that, joining thousands and thousands of other people, including the technical professionals at AE 9/11 Truth's petition. You have your name there. Why do you agree that 9/11, the building destructions in New York, should be reinvestigated?
Primarily because I met some folks here in D.C. who were also involved in 9/11 advocacy for another investigation, and I hadn't really looked closely at that at the time. And when they started pointing out to me all the observable events that were ongoing, plus some of the evidence that was being assembled, it was very obvious that it seemed to me like all the investigation that had been up to that point was basically sloppy science at best, because it was selectively ignoring basic facts. Now, what I mean by a basic fact is something that's just there that needs to be addressed. even if they can't explain it, they should have said, we can't explain this, but it's there, so they at least recognized this basic fact that existed. But it seemed to me like what the architects, engineers, I was talking to a physicist and so on about it, that these facts were basically ignored, and it wasn't that they weren't observable, because I saw them on some of the videos that they were showing me and so on, and plus the some of the testimony from some of the demolition people who've been looking at this over time had made statements like like the fall of Building 7 looked very much like a controlled demolition. Well, when you have people, I'm not an expert in demolitions, but when you have people like that saying those kinds of things, you need to address that in whatever research or investigation you're doing. And here, what you have is an investigation that basically ignored all kinds of basic observable facts that they should have addressed in one way or the other. Even if they couldn't explain it, that's fair enough, as long as they looked at it and said, "This happened. We don't know what it means or how to interpret it." That would have been fair. But when you selectively ignore those kinds of things, that's just very sloppy science at best. And so that's why I was suggesting that. That's why I was quite willing to sign the petition of saying we need to really take another look at this and come up and say, hey, these are the real events that occurred,
How much room for error is there, or not even error, but how much room is there for saying, well, we can't explain this in something as big as 9/11? I mean, here we have an event that we've based much of our domestic and foreign policy on, an event that's affected your life too, and obviously it's still affecting us here today. How much error or room do we have for saying, well, we can't explain this, we don't know what it means, and we're going to leave it at that? I mean, should we be beginning to find out why there was 105 feet of free fall, for instance, on building 7? How much is the government obligated to go down that rabbit hole until they have a final conclusion?
Well, I think my problem is just like the UFO thing. Unless they start addressing these kinds of things, that people's observations or basic measurements or factual kind of evidence that simply exists, unless they start addressing them, there's always going to be questions, and people are going to question them and never. I mean, especially now with the government, how much trust do you have in this government? From what they've been doing in spying and in torture and rendering and suppressing whistleblowers and putting whistleblowers in jail, giving immunity to people who commit these kinds of crimes. How much trust can you put in a government like that?
Exactly. And from my own observations, one of the first things that got my attention, beyond the very reasonable questions that people like Dr. Stephen Jones were asking about Building 7, was the reaction of certain government officials that I would see on TV when this came up occasionally to these reasonable questions. The complete dismissal, the complete just ignoring of facts. And again, we have an event that we've based our entire current situation on. We need to know exactly what happened. And when you ignore things like this, when you refuse to reinvestigate when new information comes to light, and acknowledge that physics still applies on 9/11, even if there's people are attaching political agendas to the event, when you refuse to look at what is in front of you, all you do is fuel more questions, and you make the people even more suspicious, and that's not good for our national security. So I mean, I agree, and I think that is the most basic reason that anybody should sign that petition, just to have an investigation in order to rule it out. Now, we talk a lot on the show about the science of the building destructions in New York on 9/11 itself, but we also talk about the results of the post-9/11 world, because this is why we demand a new investigation on this show. And your story about the NSA and the story of what the NSA is doing even slightly before 9/11, but after 9/11, what 9/11 is used to justify is as much a part of the story of 9/11 as the controlled demolition evidence. So we're going to focus on that in this show. I want to take advantage of this opportunity to talk to you.
First of all, one of the first things that kind of brought your name out there and got people talking about what the NSA was doing was Trailblazer. So talk about what Trailblazer was and why this was so controversial.
Trailblazer started out as General Hayden's plan to take the NSA into the future, but the fact is. Excuse me. The fact is, it was only a plan. It was nothing in being, and it was to be developed from scratch. When in fact we had already solved the major problems with the digital world already in a program that was already running 24 hours a day in 3 separate sites for about a year and a half. And instead of leveraging that and taking that as a risk mitigation approach by using that initially and then developing anything they could with the program Trailblazer beyond that to improve it, why they simply ignored it totally and didn't deploy it at all. We wanted to deploy it starting in January of 2001, which was a little over 7 months before 9/11. So the program that we had would have automatically tipped on things that they were doing, so it wouldn't require people to recognize it. And this gets back to what Tom Drake told me after we left NSA is he ran that program against the entire database at NSA and found all the material that was in the database prior to 9/11 that would have helped to stop 9/11 from the very beginning, that would have shown those people in San Diego calling the Yemen facility, all the other data that was there, and there was other stuff there too that Tom had that he provided to the 9/11 Commission, which it totally ignored. That again, selectively ignoring basic facts. And the whole point, I guess, was that by not taking advantage of something that already solved the problem of the digital age, why that meant that they were pushing to get more money and grow their empire. In other words, get a bigger empire and using the digital age as a justification even before 9/11. So they were using that to get more money and build up, which is what they've done. And 9/11 gave them that leverage to implement a lot of what they were planning or hoping to do, and it gave them a lot more money to make that happen. And so you could see some background with companies that were involved also, that they were interested in ensuring that the solution to the problem didn't surface so that they could also feed on all these billions of dollars that they were going to get, which is what they did. So, there were many aspects of this that all kind of said that they weren't really trying to do a proper job on either doing reviews on the intelligence side or doing reviews on the physical world, that side of it.
Right, and forgetting about the questions surrounding 9/11 that many have, and controlled demolition evidence, just going from the official story aspect, there's a lot of things about 9/11 that, as you cited, it could have been prevented, and there's even things that if you wanted to say, oh, it was just a massive intelligence failure, things that could have been done, very small things that could have been done after 9/11 to prevent it from happening again. Like I remember Congressman Ron Paul citing about putting a lock on the cockpit doors to prevent people from getting into the cockpit. And you cite that there was information out there that should have been picked up that could have helped stop a plot like this from happening. It sounds like when you say they're building their empire, I've heard people talk about government funding and how it works and how you have to spend the same amount of money each year in order to get more money. So a lot of waste takes place and it builds its empire. Now, when it builds its empire, how is this money being used once it gets it? I mean, is the money being spent to improve these systems? Because it sounds from what I read about Trailblazer that it was just basically this big monster that was being kept alive and it didn't work, and it was being used to keep alive the NSA and make it grow, kind of like some some kind of parasite or something. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but
I call it leeches.
Leeches, there you go. But does the NSA, I mean, where does that money go once they say, okay, Trailblazer needs to be improved, we had 9/11, we need to freak out and put more money into all these, into the NSA. Has that money been used effectively, in your opinion?
Absolutely not. I mean, most of it went into contracts. I think the figures are more like as close to 70% of the funding goes into contracts. which means the businesses around surrounding the agencies that feed off the agency and do contracts for them. So it fundamentally the money went to them, and that gets back to keeping the problem going. I mean, if they took the solution right away that we had developed and used it and started using it immediately, why that would have given them a great jump on solving the problem right from the beginning. But instead they ignored that. Why? Because they wanted to develop a commercial equivalent. So that meant that the companies surrounding NSA would get so much more money to do that, because they'd have to do it from scratch, as opposed to taking advantage of what we had already done as a risk mitigation approach, for example. So, that kind of added the emphasis to keep the problem, the knowledge that the problem had been solved out of sight. So, that was part of the reason I came up with their vision statement, that is these contractors and the government, the agency anyway, the whole idea, and this is not unique to NSA, it's pretty much across the government, all the government agencies. The whole idea was, as a vision statement, it says, keep the problem going so the money keeps flowing. In other words, for contractors, once they have a contract and they get building it, if they solve the problem, they no longer have a reason to get a follow-on contract, okay, other than maintenance. But so the point is, they're interested in getting the follow-on contract. That's their objective, not solving the problem. And that's been the way it's been going.
And why I think this is important for my audience to hear, because we talk about controlled demolition evidence every week, and people will often say, even when they look at it and say it should be investigated, they'll say, well, because there's implications attached to that, and people will say, well, why would who would benefit from 9/11 happening? Who in America would benefit? And this goes to show you from what you're saying, there's a lot of people that benefited and made a lot of money because 9/11 happened.
Yes, and if you looked at it, the intelligence community is getting close to $100 billion a year. So if you looked at it over the aggregate from 9/11, we're getting very close to $1 trillion that's spent on that.
So yeah, $1 trillion of our money, so on an event that still has questions attached to it. Now, your name is on a memo that went to President Obama in January of this year, which outlined how NSA leaders botched the intelligence collection and the analysis before 9/11, like we're talking about, and they covered up mistakes, and they're violating constitutional rights of American people, and all the while they're wasting billions of dollars and misleading the public. What was the reaction to that memo? Have you heard anything from President Obama or the White House? What happened after that memo went out?
Well, we got word shortly after that, in February sometime, I think it was, that the White House counsel wanted to speak to us about it. And so we were waiting to have that. We got that through the Government Accountability Project in D.C. They represent us, so they talked to them about a meeting to talk about it. And so we're still waiting. They haven't scheduled anything since then. So it was just I don't know what was going on in the White House. Maybe they changed counsels. White House counsel at the time, I'm not sure. And then the whole idea got lost. But we were trying to help them out, saying, look, these are the real problems. If you don't, it's like, you're dealing, all these agencies, they don't want to admit they made a mistake. They don't want to look bad. They want to keep their image up. So covering up is the big story for them. That's the whole objective, is to cover up anything that's wrong, or anything that makes them look like they've got warts on them or something. They have to look pristine and professional. When in fact they're messing up all over the place. And my point to them, even when I was working there, is if you don't face up to your problem, say I've got a problem, you can never solve it. It's like an alcoholic, right? If you're an alcoholic and you don't realize it, then you can't solve your problem. So if you can't face it, you can't deal with it. And that's basically what the government agencies are doing. They can't deal with their problems. They just push them to the side. That ultimately means that they have the same problems ad infinitum. They aren't going to solve them.
And it's funny because I heard it mentioned in some interview that you said that Edward Snowden, who is the big name in the press now, he learned from your experience that going through official channels doesn't work. So can you comment on that? Can you comment on what you went through? I know you were raided by the FBI, so I would go beyond saying it doesn't work, that it can sometimes be detrimental to some folks. But can you talk about your experience in trying to go forward over the last many years?
Sure. In October of 2001 was when I first started to understand, because they were using part of the program ThinThread that I had developed. They were using that to monitor everybody in the United States. That is to pull together your whole electronic life and map it out in a timeline. That's what they were doing, and it started in the second week of October of 2001. That's why I got out of there as fast as I could. At the end of October, I got out. That was the fastest I could get out of the place. So it only took me 2 weeks, so that wasn't too bad, you know. But the people they had to set up that program were the contractors that I had used to develop it. So because otherwise nobody knew how to set up the code or how to get it functioning or how to set up all the hardware and interface and all that stuff to make it work. So when they started doing that, those people came and told me that what was going on, and it was clear that they were collecting the entire electronic life of everybody every U.S. citizen in the country. So I mean, that to me said this is a direct violation of at a minimum the First Amendment of the Constitution, where you have the right to free association. It doesn't say you have the right to free association as long as NSA knows about it. In other words, the point is that when you have a network pulling together even the billing data from the telecoms, all that kind of thing lays out your entire calling network. In other words, your whole social network on the phone. Which is easy to determine. A reverse lookup is fairly simple to do. I mean, even NSA quite clearly has a reverse lookup of the entire phone book of the United States, because they demonstrated that when they were in the 60 Minutes or 60 Minutes program on the 15th of December of 2013, when they came on to show some of the techniques they were using, about how they showed a diagram of the pirates in the African Middle East area with Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. They had a little network set up there, and they showed how they would diagram it there. Later on, they also showed a list of phone numbers in the United States, and in that list, they kind of compromised that they had a reverse lookup because not only did they have number to and from, duration, date, and time, but also they had the state, which you could easily get from the area code, which is not a problem. None of the data was encrypted. It was all in the clear. And then also they listed the city. Now, you can't get the city unless you have a reverse lookup of every number in the book, because the local codes are not restricted to one city or one town. You know, they can be spilled over in multiple cities or towns, depending on proximity, geographic proximity. So that implied they had a reverse lookup, and they just didn't show the name and address and all the other data that goes with it. But it's all in the reverse lookup. So, and even you can even get a lot more if you reverse index on the web. You can get numbers of people living at the place, how many family members there are, their age, sex, all of that.
Now, after Edward Snowden made news and did what he did, the spin machine in certain media and in Congress took effect, and people started trying to minimize the revelations and saying, well, it's not a big deal, trying to put out that message that if you're not doing anything, if you're not communicating with terrorists overseas, you're okay. Don't worry about it. Don't be paranoid that they're not recording everything you do. They're just looking at who you're talking to. That was the message that's being put out. And ordinary people like myself, people who have to just rely on the media that you have, not only that you just have access to, but that you have time to read, because people have to work and live their lives too, are left wondering. They don't don't know, what can NSA really do? And I know this is kind of a big question, but you were quoted in the London Guardian. You said at least 80% of fiber optic cables globally go via the U.S. This is no accident and allows the U.S. to view all communications coming in. At least 80% of all audio calls, not just metadata, are recorded and stored in the U.S. The NSA lies about what it stores. So from your experience, your knowledge of what's going on, how afraid do we need to be? How paranoid do we need to be? What is being recorded? Is everything we do online stored somewhere?
Well, the problem, that's the reason they had to build Bluffdale, because they were collecting so much data. They had to build that 1 million square foot storage facility out there in Utah. The main program they're using to do it, from the material that's been released from Snowden's acquisitions, is that program is called Fairview, and it is on the web. If you Google Fairview, Fairview space NSA, you'll get the slides and and it'll show you in Fairview that it has the tap points on the fiber optic network. It has between 80 and 100 of those tap points inside the lower 48 of the United States. So in other words, they're tapping at least 80 taps in there, and I think on the order of 22 of them, at least from what I can see from what's in the public domain, at least 22 of those places are taps for the fiber optic network of the internet, which means it's like the one that was exposed by Mark Klein in San Francisco. That's one of them, where it had the fiber lines being passed through a prism type affair where it duplicates the line and sends a duplicate copy to the NSA room in the AT&T facility there, up to the 6th floor, and 621B, I think, is the room number. And in there, that fiber line goes into a Naris device. Now, the Naris device reassembles everything on that fiber line. You know, in the internet, they break it into packets and send a series of packets. Well, the Naris device will reassemble those packets into what you originally input, like the email, the file transfer, or whatever you're doing, chat, or whatever it is. So that then could present that for storage, all of it on all those lines. So, and there are like 22 of them on the main, and with the main centers for the internets of the on the fiber optic network inside the United States. Now, this is all done within the continental United States. And then the other 60 or so appear to me to be for the telephone network, public switch telephone network. They're principally digitally recording as many phone calls as they can. And I estimated that to be about 80% of every phone call you make is recorded somewhere for a period of time anyway. So they have some window to look at anything that you've said on the telephone. Like, I assume it's something like maybe 30 days or less that they have that window of opportunity to look at what you said on any phone call.
And then is the information deleted, or it's just stored? Are you talking about legally they have 30 days, or that they just for logistics reasons have 30 days?
Yeah, it's a problem of having the capacity to store that kind of because I estimated that there were on the order of 3 billion phone calls every day within the United States alone. So I mean that's quite a bit to store for any long period of time. So I think they take a short period of time. They probably take a certain number of a million or so phones worldwide that they keep the recordings permanently. But the rest of them, I think they have that window of 30 days for 80%, at least 80% of the phone calls being made in the United States. Now, the digital stuff, the textual kind of material, I think they store that almost indefinitely for a minimum of 5 years at least. So that's easy to store. It's not that difficult to reassemble and store. So, and that's why Bluffdale was built for the storage primarily that. The digital data and the phone numbers that they really want to keep.
So obviously the companies, like the email companies, the phone companies, must be cooperating with this. Am I correct?
Oh yes, yeah, they certainly are. They've been doing it. That's why in 2008 they had to give retroactive immunity to all the telecommunications companies because they were committing crimes transferring that data without a warrant. Okay, so, and even when one warrant came out, from the FISA court, it was a general warrant, and it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says you can't get this data without a warrant, and there you have to specifically state who you're after, what you're after, and where you're after it. So they didn't list the specific names of the 110 plus million subscribers to the Verizon communications company. So, and that's what they should have done under the Fourth Amendment. If they were interested in doing that, they should have done that, and they didn't.
Well, that's how you and me and probably all our other listeners here were taught that America works, is that you have to get a warrant, that there's a Fourth Amendment that protects you. That's why we are America. But a lot has changed in the post-9/11 world we talk about all the time. Now, as I mentioned, you were raided by the FBI. Can you tell our audience that story? What led to the FBI coming into your house?
Well, after October of 2001, when I found out that they were spying on everybody in the United States, and I left NSA as fast as I could, I started to try to work internally in the government to try to get the government to right itself. You know, let's conform to the Constitution, please. And so I went to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees and talked to staffers there that I knew. And I also talked to the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, and tried to get to talk to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to make it clear to them what was really going on, because they weren't really being told. I mean, there were very few people who were. This was all kept very secret. So I mean, it was done basically all in secret with a secret court. Nobody ever saw the rulings. You know, and I had a secret understanding of the Patriot Act and a secret understanding of the FISA Amendment Act, and also a secret understanding of how they applied Executive Order 12333, which is the main one they're using to collect all the domestic data. From my view, anyway, that's what I see they're using to do that. So all of that was done in secret. In essence, we had a secret government with a secret constitution and secret laws. And that to me was not a democracy. And so I was trying to work internally in the government to get them to realize, talking to other members of the House and Senate, trying to get them to understand that this is destroying our entire republic. It is rotting the entire foundation of what we call our country, America. Our founders would be rolling over in their graves if they knew what they were doing.
As you're doing this, what is the reaction? Because it seems if I was a congressman, I mean, this seems kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but that would kind of tick me off if I'm supposed to be on some kind of House Oversight Committee of the NSA and they're doing secret things under my noses. What kind of reaction are you getting from these congressmen?
Well, one of them that I talked to directly said at the time in 2001, or early 2002, he said that, yes, we understand there's a lot of real problems out there at NSA, but now's not the time to fix them. Because, you know, it was right after 9/11 and everybody was all upset about it. We have to do something. That's what the president was blowing the horn of war. You know, we were getting ready to go to war and things like that. And we had to find somebody to attack and get back at them, like in Afghanistan and so on. So there was a whole mental atmosphere then of we you know, we aren't really that concerned about constitutional rights at the moment. So let's just go ahead and do what we have to do. The president was arguing that he had these powers under War Powers Act. Mm-hmm. You know, but if you read the Constitution, only Congress can declare war, and up to this time, Congress has never declared war. So, I mean, that was a false premise to begin with. So, you know, all of that was going on, and we were down there irritating everybody by talking to everybody, and so that meant that, you know, the Department of Justice, the White House, and the NSA, you know, were getting irritated from questions from other people. I mean, after all, none of the congressmen could tell what was being told to them was true or not. All they had to do was trust what NSA says to them. That's currently the state, too. There's no verification process or capability at all by the Congress or the courts or anybody with what NSA is doing. I mean, even when the Church Committee was doing their investigation, it only came out recently, one of the people they were spying on at the time was Frank Church, Senator Church, running the investigation. Why? Well, they'd want to know what he was thinking, what he was doing, what he was planning, you know. How could they deal with it and be prepared in advance? That's what they were after. So, you know, and so that only came out recently. Nobody, you know, and the point is that nobody can really verify what they're saying. So that was one of the things we put into suggestions to the president is here's how you can have a verification process that will work. That was one of the main points that we wanted to make to him. But he ignored that too. So, the point is that at that point, we had been doing that up until 2007, from 2001 to 7. And at that point, they said, well, they've had enough. Now they've got justification to trump up charges against us with the New York Times release of something, which we had nothing to do with. And they knew that, by the way, because they had all the data from us from the Stellar Wind program, all our phone calls and emails. So they knew that we were not part of the compromise of anything but the New York Times. But they used it as justification to raid us, and they sent the FBI at us to keep us quiet, to shut us up, to threaten us, and the DOJ threatened to prosecute us 3 separate times between 2007 and 9. So that was keeping us quiet, so we wouldn't be coming out and talking about all the crimes they were committing. So that was their whole objective, and that's why they did it. And of course, the raid occurred the morning of the second day after Alberto Gonzales, the then Attorney General of the United States, testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee about the program, the terrorist surveillance, the TSP, supposedly, the TSP, the President's terrorist surveillance program. All he did at that time was testify to the warrantless wiretap, and that was what was exposed by the President. That was the limit of what he talked about. There were many other programs under that, and he knew that, but he didn't testify to that. So they wanted to make sure we didn't go down there and open up another Pandora's box for him by telling the Judiciary Committee all the rest of the programs. So that was the reason the FBI raided us, and they raided Diane Rourke, Kirk Wiebe, and me simultaneously at 9 o'clock at our homes, and they hit Kirk Wiebe about the same time or shortly thereafter when he was at work. That was at 9 o'clock in the morning for us. Because Diane Rourke was on the West Coast, it was 6 o'clock in the morning for her, and the warrant said that it said that they couldn't raid us before 6 a.m. So they picked 6 a.m. on the West Coast. That meant 9 o'clock on the East Coast, and they did a simultaneous raid on 4 of us. Now, we were the 4 people who signed the DOD-IG complaint against NSA for corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse, all of which they found to be true, and have published their own document stating such, although 98 or 99% of it was redacted by NSA as too sensitive because it was too damning to what their processes and decision process and all the management processes that they had, what they did and how they failed at every turn. So that was the reason that was one of the main reasons that they wanted to raid us, to get retribution for that. They knew that we weren't involved in the New York Times thing, but that was a way to come get at us anyway. So that's what they used. And even after that, they tried to frame us. So it was that was the final straw for me. When the Department of Justice starts cranking out charges against you that are fabrications of evidence, then it clearly is that we're losing our entire democracy is what we're doing. I mean, they're subverting the entire judicial process, and they're using the NSA collected data to do it too. So, and they're lying to the courts. That's what they did with the case Amnesty International versus Clapper. A friend of mine, Chris Hedges, was a signatory to that lawsuit, and that was in the Supreme Court. Well, the government had the Solicitor General go in and argue in the Supreme Court that if any of the NSA data was used against anybody in the United States, that in a courtroom, that the defendants would be told, because they have the constitutional right to challenge discovery of evidence against them. And so there was that was a lie. No one had been told up to that point about any of this data being used against them. So the end result was that the Supreme Court threw it out based on that kind of statement that would happen, when in fact it never has. And now the Solicitor General is struggling to find out how many cases they've used the NSA data in, and now they're starting to say, well, from now on we'll start talking about this data in the courtroom. Well, that doesn't solve the problem of all the violations of the constitutional rights of everybody to that point. Now, according to Feinstein, when she was talking to support this program on the Senate floor, she said that this was very helpful in criminal cases and up to several hundred criminal cases a year. Well, that means there's been several thousand violations of the constitutional right of people, and they're all in jail as a result of that. So, this is why I started calling this a police state, because they're using this data in secret. I mean, this was reported in Reuters in August of last year, and one of the federal agents said, "This is such a great program. I just hope we can keep it secret."
Huh.
Well, this is not a democracy when they do that.
Well, you talk about this and how everything, all these rights have been violated up to a certain point. They were saying, oh, now we can use this in the court, but what about all of the violations in the past? And then I think back to congressmen saying, well, we know that there's problems with the NSA, but now is not the time to fix it. We don't want to fix it right now. Well, when do you fix it? When it's become institutionalized? When all these people's rights have been violated? The time to fix something is in the very beginning of the problem, before it gets out of control. And what we're seeing now, the NSA is out of control. Now, to bring it back around to 9/11, because all of this, again, is justified or supposedly justified by 9/11. I mentioned earlier about Snowden saying he learned from your experience that going through official channels doesn't work. Now, without putting you on the spot, answer as much or as little as you can or want to. What advice would you give to the experts in the 9/11 truth movement, like the scientists who discovered the nanothermite, who did the nanothermite study, or the group that discovered the omitted information in the NIST World Trade Center 7 report? What advice would you give them on how to proceed in getting a new investigation? I mean, what are we doing wrong? What are we doing right?
Well, I think my point would be always to focus in on the basic facts that can't be refuted, and home in on them and make sure that you focus on them to the point where you say, you need to answer these issues here. If you didn't know about it, you should have. And if you knew about it and suppressed it, why? Otherwise, we need to have an answer to this. That's why we need a new investigation. I mean,
right.
It should be that simple. You should stay straight with the facts that are irrefutable.
That is absolutely right, and I state that every week on this show. Is you get beyond theorizing, get beyond blame at this point, and just establish the very facts, the very provable scientific facts that groups like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth bring to the table. And then look what happens. Again, somebody doesn't have to agree on what the outcome was to agree on the basic fact that the fall of Building 7 is a little weird and should be investigated, and that is exactly where you need people. And if you can get people in positions of power and authority to agree with that stance and actually agree to do something about that, then, I mean, good God, we're on our way to our final goal here, which is a new investigation and letting the chips fall where they may. Now, I heard you say something in another interview, and I know you're not a lawyer, so feel free to say I don't know if you don't, but you mentioned when you were talking about the NSA issue, Executive Order 13526, Section 1.7, which covers classifications for the U.S. government where you can't cover up a crime, fraud, waste, or abuse by classifying things. Now, we have NIST.
You can also not keep it classified if it's evidence of a crime.
If it's evidence of a crime. So we have NIST refusing to disclose its World Trade Center 7 computer model data under National Safety Team Act, claiming that releasing it would jeopardize public safety. Now, how does that gel with the executive order? Do you think they're unrelated? I mean, is there a violation here in your opinion?
Well, again, I think it's just another manifestation of the agencies of the U.S. government trying to cover up their incompetence and failure. It's a matter of you want to hide your warts. You don't want to expose them to anything. So you cover them up as best you can.
But what's kind of funny, because I've had people on this program in the past, and I had a guy from Scotland who was involved in finding the information that they didn't include in the World Trade Center 7 report, and he was talking about this concept of maladministration, where if you're in a position of authority and you do such a bad job, I mean, let's just assume that they're not even covering up, but they're just doing such a horrible job with what they're tasked to do that they can be guilty of a crime. Now, I don't know if that law really applies here in the United States. It's something over in Scotland. But what about admissions and cover-ups in a case as big as this? I mean, this is not like your average event here. I mean, this is 9/11. We want to make sure we get everything right. I mean, how much trouble can somebody get into in our system of laws here for keeping stuff classified or just covering up important information in an investigation this big?
My view of that has always been that they're all accomplices of a cover-up. They are drawn into the crime because they're covering it up and they're becoming an accomplice in the crime.
Now, what, in your opinion, are the consequences of not reinvestigating 9/11, particularly the facts presented by AE 9/11 Truth regarding the building destructions in New York?
Well, I mean, I think that has many ramifications in terms of insurance, collecting insurance, and all kinds of things, and and getting some. Because some of the people, like the former director before Hayden at NSA, had said we're going to have some kind of major catastrophic event to change how we do things. Well, I was maintaining we didn't have to change a damn thing because we were quite capable of stopping all this from the very beginning. We had all the data even before 9/11. We just didn't have the ability to see it. That was what the whole program Thin Thread was all about, to be able to do that. So, and do it automatically without people. So the point was they felt they had to have justification to make a major change in how they are doing business. And so I think that's what helped impede any success prior to 9/11. Although, there was some evidence that before 9/11 they were attempting to collect material on virtually every citizen of the United States by, I believe it's in court records from the trial of Naccio, the former CEO of Quest, when he was being tried for some funny business with stocks. He had mentioned that and testified that he had been approached, and it was on the records of the visits in Quest, that NSA people approached him to get all the data on all his customers. Well, that meant all his U.S. customers as well. So they were doing that, and that was done on February of 2001, which was a month after we were ready to deploy our system, which meant our system was functioning end to end. That meant that 1 month later they're out soliciting all this data on U.S. citizens, but they don't implement it until after 9/11 in October of that year. So there's a sequence of things there that kind of imply that once we had succeeded at putting everything together, they were going to use that to go after all U.S. citizens, which is what they did after 9/11.
Right, and it's what we call the post-9/11 world, where we are the target. It seems like the terrorists became the American people, the innocent American people.
Well, and the whole idea was they were justifying that by their quote need to search everything to find terrorists. Well, that was an outright lie too. They are duping everybody in the country and also the Congress and the courts. That was never necessary to do. In fact, we had shown that was not needed even before 9/11 with that program in late 2000, early 2001. So, but that was the program they ignored, and so the whole idea was that the sense I got was they felt they had to have something drastic happen so they would justify them taking drastic action and getting a lot more money to build up an empire and do lots of things that they felt they needed to do.
You have colleagues out there, whether or not you even know them. There might be people at NSA currently listening to this show, or just supporters of yours who followed you and like what you're doing, who may obviously talk out about the NSA, but may not even be aware of the issues surrounding the building destructions in New York on 9/11. If you could talk to them right now, how can they help? What should they be doing to push for just a simple new investigation into the building destructions in New York? What would you have to say to them?
Well, the ones at NSA, they should be pushing to to get a reinvestigation, a new 9/11 Commission investigation, because of all the data that was not included in that investigation. Even though Tom Drake personally told the members of that 9/11 Commission this information, they excluded it from their report. So, I mean, all that data is it's like selectively picking what you include as evidence. Well, the same is true here with 9/11 in terms of from what I've seen from the evidence that I've seen personally. Why it's clear that they're selectively ignoring certain facts or basic evidence, which is what they did in the NSA side in terms of the 9/11 Commission. It was the same parallel kind of approach. So ignore things that are inconvenient for the story you want to tell. So I think from all sides we need a reinvestigation. It's not just the 9/11 side, it's also the intelligence community, all of that, because they've excluded certain information and they shouldn't have.
Right, and something anyone can do. I mean, we have a good guy from the NSA on here who put his name to that petition, and here he is talking about this. We need more folks to put their names to that petition and to talk openly about that, because the more we talk openly about this issue, the less taboo it becomes, the more acceptable it becomes, and the peer pressure mentality dissipates. Now, in our final 2 minutes here, can you just briefly tell me, on the issue of the NSA, which is a result of the post-9/11 world, and the issue with 9/11 and all the issues about the building destructions in New York, do you think we can have positive ends to these kind of national sagas we're going through? Do you think America can still work for the people and we can have justice and restore some normalcy in this country?
Yes, we can, but it's going to take a whole new administration. I mean, there's so many people down in the House and Senate, and also in the leadership anyway, and also in the White House and the agencies and the Department of Justice, who all have a vested interest in protecting this from becoming public. Because they're all basically covering up for themselves and trying to justify it amongst themselves. Because if one falls, they feel they all will fall. So it's a matter of protecting everybody and circling the wagons and defending your story. So we need basically new people, a fresh look at this whole thing from the congressional side as well as in the White House. I mean, we need people who will take an honest, hard, investigative look at all of this stuff and start coming out publicly and saying what's going on and being truthful with us, so we can have an informed electorate to be able to make decisions about who should be representing us in D.C.
Right, and that all starts with courage. It all starts with that inner spark that drives people like yourself to speak out and do what you do, and drives the people like a 9/11 Truth movement, also the people who are blowing the whistle, who are talking out about the NSA and writing about it. It requires that kind of courage to make you shed all of these fears of talking about it and do the work of righting the wrongs that have taken place in the past decade, and like we said, restoring America to some normalcy again. Mr. William Binney, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Free Fall. This hour has gone by so fast, but it's been an honor to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.